He's not here tonight, but he's here quite often. And he wrote these 2 stories. He said, "About 10 days ago, my wife told me of this little girl, 14 months old. My wife is a very dear friend of the grandmother of this little girl. And the little girl had cancer. She developed certain lumps in her neck, took her to the hospital, and a little biopsy was made of the tissues, and they brought back the verdict, cancer. Another doctor looked at it, and he questioned it. He wasn't quite sure, not convinced, so there was a difference of opinion there. Then they brought in 3 specialists separately. Each brought in the verdict, cancer. So here were 4, and 1 not quite convinced. But they kept the child in the hospital for further examination. Now this night, 10 days ago, his wife told him the story. He said, "I sat there and I listened to much of the story, and then I tuned her out to the point where I couldn't even hear what she was saying. I reconstructed the entire story in my mind's eye and redid it along the lines that I wanted to hear, and I actually heard my wife's voice telling me an entirely different story. As she was telling me the story, I completely revised it at a certain point. Then that night, when I was completely alone and not distracted, I redid the whole thing to make myself convinced and to be sure I actually heard my wife's voice telling me the revised story." The child was kept in the hospital, and then they made another test from another lump in the neck, and a unanimous vote was brought in. The child does not have cancer, and therefore, because they had no remedial treatment done in the hospital, she never had cancer. They couldn't conceive of any other treatment. They did not give her any radium, gave her nothing, no injections. Therefore, they were 100% wrong, they confessed the first time, because without treatment, the child could never have overcome the condition. So, when the wife heard the new verdict of a complete change in the little 14-month-old child, she told the mother and the grandmother what her husband had done. Meanwhile, the neighborhood has been told this and they are agog, but they can't for one moment credit an imaginal act as causation. That imagining creates reality is the height of insanity. Nevertheless, this is his story, that, as every mystic knows, every natural effect has a spiritual cause and not a natural one. A natural cause only seems, and it is a delusion of this world. And man has a very, very poor memory. He can't relate what's taking place to any imaginal act in his past, because he's looking for physical causation. And he cannot believe that he did anything that would have produced this, not knowing that the doing was imaginal, not physical. He sat alone and he imagined, and he set in motion a cause, and when the cause came into the world and he saw the effects, he did not go back into the psychic state of his being, he went back into the physical state. And he can't remember where he ever did physically anything worthy of this thing that he is now reaping. So, his imagination is setting the whole thing in motion, but his memory is faulty, and that is the vegetating memory that simply disintegrates because it isn't really. He looks upon the man who claims that it is all imagination as a fool. As Blake said, the idiot reasoner laughs at the man of imagination. So I tell you, everything in your world is caused by an imaginal act. Now, he said, I was driving home and suddenly I thought, here comes April 15th and I could use a little more cash. Uncle Sam is making demands upon my income, so I could use a little more. Then, in my imagination, I simply imagined that lovely green, crisp currency was raining upon me, gently raining upon me. And then for about a minute, I simply lost myself in this little shower of green currency. Then the traffic demanded my complete attention, so I dropped it instantly and came back to this world. It only took about a minute, if a minute. And then I continued home in my normal alert state. I never thought about it again. On the morning of the 15th, my boss came into the office and he said to me, "You will receive a 10% raise in salary retroactive to April 1st, and then gave me a check retroactive with a 10% increase in salary. Now, he said, I simply took this green currency falling gently upon me. But let me warn you tonight. Wait till you get home to do it if you're driving the highway. Be alert while you're driving. You can do it just as well while you're reclining in your bed preparing yourself for sleep. Or do it when you are sitting down in a chair. But it works. This actually works." Everything is an imaginal act. There is no such thing as a physical causation. It's imaginal. But the world will not accept it. We are looked upon as simply idiots, and they laugh at the man of imagination when he tells you that everything in this world is caused by some mental act. Well, try to disprove it. You can say that man struck so-and-so, and therefore that was a physical cause, and the blow that he received, that was the effect, and therefore the whole thing was simply constructed physically. It wasn't so. What preceded the impulse to strike him? You go back to an unseen cause, and it was an imaginal act. The whole vast world is brought into being by imagination, sustained in being by imagination, and when imagination no longer sustains it, it dissolves and leaves not a trace behind, not a trace. So here, one must approach this gospel on this level first, and you get their interest on this level so that they prove it in the testing, as my friend proved it. He received a 10% raise retroactive to the first of the month. And then the little girl, 14 months old, instead of having cancer as 5 doctors agreed, and then they changed their opinion. But to justify their false judgment, they had to admit it wasn't so in the beginning, because nothing was given to her. There was no treatment, and unless treatment was given, it could not have ever been cancer. Therefore it never was. Well, that's all right with him. It's perfectly all right. The child has not received any verdict by the doctors of cancer. Now you'll say, how can a little girl 14 months old? Why should she suffer? To you, she is 14 months old. To you. She isn't any 14 months old. The garment she wears, judged by human standards, is 14 months old, but not the little girl that is there. She's old as God himself, and God has no beginning, no end. He chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Not when she came out of her mother's womb, but before the foundation of the world. Before physical creation, you and I were chosen in him for a purpose. Now without that purpose, without that meaning, what would it matter if you this night owned the entire world, and there was no meaning to it, and death closed the book and that was final? Well, many a tyrant believes that. You can't blame him for being a tyrant. If he really believes it, well then, how can you blame him? Who wouldn't do just what he did if you really believed that death ends it all? Shakespeare in his Macbeth is perfectly right. A tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That's what it would have to be if there were no promise, no purpose, no meaning behind the entire thing. Nothing that is said of Jesus, not a thing about Jesus is proven outwardly, but nothing. Only the visionaries know him, he who wears this dark body, this mask. For he is not of this world. He's entirely different. We are from below, we are told, and he is from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. John 8:23. So why look for him in this world? And yet throughout the history of man, they have been looking for him in the Near East. And then those who do not know, who have not the vision, say this is the spot where he was crucified, and that's the spot where he was buried, and this is the robe that he wore, and that is a piece of wood that came from the cross on which he was nailed. They build up this fantastic tradition. As we are told in the 15th chapter of Matthew, the traditions of our fathers have voided the word of God. Matthew 15:6. The word of God has completely gone from you because of the traditions of your fathers. You have kept these traditions alive, believing in a physical Jesus, and it's not a physical Jesus at all. Jesus is the pattern buried in every man, and it suddenly erupts in the fullness of time. Christ in you is the hope of glory. Colossians 1:27. And do you not realize that Jesus Christ is in you, unless of course you fail to meet the test? 2 Corinthians 13:5. So you begin to test on this level with his power called the law, so that you can actually bring all things to pass. Like my friend who simply allowed crisp bills, not debt but currency, to fall upon him. And having received it like a gentle shower then in a matter of days, the boss comes in and tells him a 10% raise has been voted for him, and it's retroactive. So, his so-called immediate problem has been solved. But now it continues. It wasn't just for the month. This now continues as long as he is employed by this company. From what I have been told, they certainly do want him in their employment. Do not allow anything in this world to confront you with something impossible. Nothing is impossible to imagination, and the whole thing is done in imagination. So you are not responsible as a reasoning being to make it so. You simply imagine that it is so. My friend who told me the story, what did he know about cancer? If he saw the cancer under the microscope, what is called cancer, he wouldn't recognize it. He doesn't know a thing about the human body any more than I do, but he would know what his wife would tell him if the verdict were reversed. And so now she goes out trying to convert the grandmother and the mother of the child to the belief that imagining does create reality. Well, she has a task. They are going to believe the wise doctors that she never had it anyway, that they were wrong in their diagnosis. She could not have shown it under the microscope, and then in a matter of days, say within 2 or 3 weeks, to show no evidence that it was ever present. That was impossible, therefore she never had it. Not that she had it, and an imaginal act dissipated it. Oh no, because they can't believe in causation as mental. Causation must be under that microscope as a little physical thing. Though you can't see it with a normal eye, you can see it with the extended eye of the microscope, and therefore it is still physical. So the entire structure has to be physical for them. They take it now, put the little biopsy, the little tissue, and go right down with their aid, the microscope, and they see what is called a cancer cell. Then 10 days or 3 weeks later, they don't see the cancer cell. Therefore, they could not have seen accurately the first time. They know nothing of my friend's attitude toward life, that the whole thing is imaginal. Since he started coming here, he has gone up and up and up by simply imagining. He doesn't burst a blood vessel. He simply tuned out his wife's voice as it was coming through, going beyond the point he wanted to hear. He heard enough, that the little child, 14 months old, had cancer confirmed by all the doctors, and there were 5. Only one questioned. He didn't deny, only questioned. But 3 experts, all coming in singly, not together, each went out on the limb and said it was cancer. So there were 4 against 1 for cancer. But he tuned her out and simply reconstructed the entire drama in his mind's eye and listened to his wife's voice that he knows well, completely changing the entire picture, and tells him what he wanted her to say. He heard it distinctly. That was all that he did. And that word of his could not return unto him void. It had to accomplish that which he purposed and bring it into fulfillment. He determined that. He knows nothing of the human body. He did nothing but remain faithful to that imaginal act, and the verdict came in. So I ask you to try it. Try it, and then turn to your neighbor, in a quiet way, and ask if they ever thought that their imaginal acts are causative. You might get a little wedge in that way. Did it ever occur to you that the things that are happening to you in your world are caused not by the obvious, but caused by some unseen imaginal act? Well, you may interest them that way, and then having received their interest for a moment, then you can ask them to try it. You can construct a scene for them and have that scene come to pass in their world. If it is duplicated and repeated again and it works, well then, you've got them. Now you may present them with the promise, the most incredible thing in the world, that here this little weak garment and can be so completely transformed that it can rise from the dead. Completely rising from the dead, not restored to life as the world is always restored, but a completely transformed being, something entirely different. Yes, the face is human, the hands human, the voice human, but don't go beyond that because you don't know the form. Face human, yes, that I tell you, the hands human, the voice human, but don't try in any way to describe the form. We'll come only to the point of light. How can you have a body that's of light? Well, don't go beyond it. I'm giving you my own experience. The head, yes, beautiful beyond measure and human. And the hands, yes. The one thing that separates man from the entire creation is the hand. Without a hand, if I were the wisest being in the world, without a hand, I couldn't execute my contract. Give me a hand, I become a builder. So the first word is a hand. Yod is a hand. The hand of the creator, the hand of the director, that hand that can fashion. If I couldn't fashion, then I would go around nude. I couldn't fashion a suit of clothes. I couldn't fashion anything. But give me a hand and you turn me into my Father's image. I have a human face, I have hands, and I have a voice, and it's human. Now the being that you're destined to be is that. But now don't go beyond it in trying to, in any way, conceive of what the form is like. That's the being, that's the fiery being that you really are, and you are destined to be, and you'll awaken as that being. But you tell this to someone who would rather be the same little thing restored. Something that they must carry to the bathroom several times a day, and perform all the normal functions themselves, and perpetuate that forever. Can you imagine such hell? No, that's not the body that you're going to wear. You're going to wear the body that is the body of God Himself, for you're destined to awaken as that form. But while you're in the world of Caesar, don't neglect the law. Don't treat it lightly. Use it every moment of time, and there's not a thing in this world beyond your ability to imagine. It's not your responsibility in this world to make it so. You simply imagine that it is so, and let it be so, and then in a way that no one knows it is crystallizing itself into this world and becoming a fact. That is the world in which we live. Now before you judge it, I ask you to try it. It would be stupid to pass judgment on something that you haven't tested, and so many people do that. They will say, I don't like that. Have you ever had it? No, but I know I won't like it. Well, you can acquire a taste for anything. I know the first time I had an oyster. It was on the little island of St. Croix. In those days, we spoke of it as Santa Cruz. It was owned by the Danes. Mother told me when I left Barbados to go to Santa Cruz to watch what other people did, because they were a different people, and therefore they ate differently, and they ate different foods that I didn't know. I was only 11 years old. She said, "You watch." In those days, there were no hotels, only rooming houses, and so you sat down at the same common table. If there were 20 roomers, well then, there were 20 roomers, and the man and the wife who ran the place sat with us, and they conducted the whole thing. Well, in Santa Cruz where I am, it's 1916. They're all speaking Danska, they're all Danish, and I couldn't understand one word. But I could observe what they were doing. And so, the dinner started off, and they were all around the table, and here before me were these 6 little things on shells. Never saw one before. Mother said to watch what the host did. So she took this little fork, something I never saw before either, little tiny fork. She first put all these little condiments on the thing. When she got it into her mouth, it satisfied her, and then that face was like heaven. Well, I expected the same thing. I did the same thing and stuck it into my mouth. It wouldn't go down and I couldn't bring it up. Can't expectorate it. Mother said that after all you couldn't spit it out. No matter what happens, if I die, I have to swallow it. And it wouldn't go down. Finally, when I swallowed, then I looked down and I must have turned green. There were 5 more to go and I couldn't say no. Today I love oysters. Love them. When I go to New York, we get these lovely oysters. Every dinner I precede my meal with either oysters or the little clams, the little neck, not the cherry stone, not my favorite, but the little neck. They're limited in supply and that's what I order, or the oysters. And here today I thoroughly enjoy them. I can enjoy an oyster in any form. I prefer it in its raw state, but give it to me fried, give it to me oysters Rockefeller anyway. I had my first experience at the age of 11, so you can acquire a taste for anything in this world. So you can acquire a taste for the Word of God. But introduce them first with the law and tell them how it works, and then show them how it works. Ask them to repeat it. No matter how difficult the problem, let them confront it with this principle. If they are very ardent, they may turn from you even though they become enriched by the law that you taught them. Perfectly all right. It takes quite a while to break down these traditions, but you go back and you read it in the 15th chapter of the book of Matthew, how for the sake of your traditions you have made void the word of God. So they'll keep alive all of these things and wear all these silly little garments on the outside, with their purple robes and their red robes and all these things and hats so heavy they can't even hold them up. Here they are, They think that makes them very, very important. And the unthinking millions will think themselves blessed if they can but touch the garment as he walks by, or if he will smile on them, of if they can even attend service where he, the Great One, is conducting the Mass. They firmly believe this nonsense. You take it seriously, because at my age, even if I lived on for a few years, it can't be that long and I must depart. And those of you who would have seen as I have told you that you will see, will depart too. And when the eyewitnesses depart, they only leave behind them the ministers of the word, and they invariably turn it into some institutional concept, and therefore void the word of God, completely void it. But you take me seriously and start tonight. Of course, you've already done it, with the law, and prove it. And you'll prove it. You'll become exactly the man, the woman that you want to be. But don't forget the promise in the proving of the law. For without the promise, what would it matter if you owned the earth? What would it matter? I read Stalin's daughter's book. You might have read it, and you recall the passage. She was present when her father died. She said she has never seen such an expression of hate in her life. He was paralyzed on one side, and on the unparalyzed side he raised the hand in an expression of anger. He couldn't have seen, because the brain was gone, but he saw something not with the physical eye. He saw something, and the response came out in a physical manner. Whatever he saw, she said, I've never seen such hate in my life as expressed on my father's face, as though the devil himself stood before him and he was simply defiant. He could have seen the composite picture of the 20 million that he slaughtered personified as one face facing him, and the hand, this little hand, raised in defiance. And then he collapsed and was gone. He didn't believe in the hereafter, and he didn't believe that he would ever be restored. This was it, therefore. Do what you want. He looked upon the entire crowd standing on the podium with him, and under his breath, when hundreds of thousands were cheering him, he would say, "Fools!" He looked upon them just as a cast of nothing. And yet today we find all these silly people ballooning him up as an important person in this world, and he didn't care anything about anyone, slaughtered as he felt like it. But he has to face himself now, and he's not playing the part of Stalin. He's playing, yes, the same being, but a young man, healthy and strong enough to shine the shoes or clean the latrines or do something that's consistent with his life that is best needed to work upon him, to bring out that something that is hidden in him, which he denied while he was here. So I ask you to simply try it. Take the law. For those who are here for the first time, it's simple. This is what you do. Do you know what you want? Well, construct a scene in your imagination which would imply that you have realized it. Try to enter into the spirit of the scene and participate as an actor in the scene, giving as much of the tones of reality as you possibly can to the scene, giving it all of the sensory vividness that you are capable of giving it. Enter into the spirit of it and feel the reality of it. But go to the end. Don't consider the means. Go to the end. The whole thing is already done and you are now reveling in the accomplishment, and then break it. Now faith is simply loyalty to this unseen reality. That's what faith is, to remain loyal to this unseen reality. For when you did it, that was God in action. Who did it? If I ask you, you say, I did it. Well, that's his name. Who's doing it now? I am. Well, that's God's name forever and forever. So you do it in your imagination and then drop it. Just as he dropped the little gentle rain of crisp bills that fell upon him. And the boss comes in and tells him you've been voted a 10% increase in salary retroactive to the first of the month. So his little problem was solved. And then the problem, which was a serious problem for the mother and grandmother of the little girl, that was solved. The doctors are still looking under their microscopes to see why they misinterpreted the first. And as they see the first, they will still come to the same conclusion. How did it happen? Well, it could not have happened. Therefore it didn't. They'll be confronted with it, and still it didn't happen that way. It never was cancer, because it isn't cancer. For if it was cancer, there should have been some treatment, and there was no treatment, therefore it could not have been cancer. And they'll go over this over and over like a squirrel in a cage, because it's only in our imagination. That's all that he did, And this man lives this way morning, noon and night. As he told me in his letter, when I first came to you, I thought you were the maddest person out of the insane asylum. I thought really you should be put away for the good of society, that you were stark mad. I really believed you were, but I was forced to try it, and so I tried it and it worked. It didn't make sense. Not any more than the promise makes sense. There's nothing more fantastic than the promise, and it doesn't make sense. From a worldly point of view, it is completely incredible. But I tell you it's true that buried in man is a plan of redemption in every man, and in the fullness of time that plan erupts, and all that is said of that man in the Gospels you experience. Then you know that man, and that he wasn't here as an individual being. He simply was the plan who awoke in one being, whose name was who knows. But the name of the plan is Jesus. Jesus is Jehovah, that's what the word means. It is I am, and so that is the being that is in every man, and every man is going to have the experience of Jesus Christ. There is not a bunch of little Jesuses running around. There is only one. So we are all gathered together one by one into the one body, the one Spirit, the one Lord, the one God and Father of all. So that's what he said, that he would take us all together into the one. Gather all into one being. Now that expression that is used in Ephesians, the first chapter, the root of that Greek word is head. So where do you gather it? In the head, for that's where it begins. You are buried there, you are crucified there, and you resurrect there. When you return there from this external world. That's where you return. So you're gathered all together into this one state, and this gathering is the head. As though it's what Sir James Jean said, the more he studies this infinite universe, the more he has come to the conclusion that whoever the creator is resembles an infinite brain, and we brain cells in the mind of the dreamer. So the brain cell is expanding forever and forever within the one brain. Now let us go into the silence.